Fasting, a practice that has been there as long ago as our ancestors. It's been used for therapeutic reasons or for religious reasons. So today we are going to look at fasting and how that impacts our health and our wellness. Is it worth the hype? What is it all about? My name is Dr. Sess. I'm a public health specialist. All things health and wellness is my passion. So, what is fasting? Fasting is when we deliberately abstain from eating and sometimes from taking any fluids, either for therapeutic reasons or for some people for religious reasons, really. But then today we are going to focus on fasting from a health perspective, looking at what happens within our bodies, how that can be beneficial, and for people that are interested in fasting, what are some of the nitty-gritties and the practice around it. So then today, let's look at what are some of the fasting practices that are out there. So let's look at some of the fasting practices that are out there. Just to mention, the famous breakfast term comes from the fact that once we have our dinner and before we eat the first meal of the day, we are usually in a fasted state. That's a state where the body is not having any incoming food to derive energy from. So then, in essence, we are practically fasting most of our lives just for a short duration. What's the other type of fasting? It depends really with the number of hours you want to stay without food or the number of days for some people. So one of the common practices is the famous intermittent fasting, where you are eating within specific time periods and then going without food for specific time periods. And one of the easiest and the simplest forms is to basically increase the time before you have your breakfast. So then if you often have your breakfast at 8 a.m. or at 7 or at 6, is that you push it a bit forward so that you're aiming for around 13 to 15 hours before you eat your food from the last time you had your meal. And you've heard of the famous 16-8 interval type of fasting, where you're eating within an 8-hour window period and then staying for 16 hours without food. Then we have the famous, you've heard of the famous Dr. Osumi, who won a Nobel Prize because he discovered the autophagy type of fasting. So autophagy is usually people who've stayed in a fasted state and have reached above the 16-hour mark. That's when autophagy starts to happen, but we'll get into that in a little while. Then you have people that actually will go up to 36 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours, going all the way to 2 days, 3 days, and sometimes up to 5 days of fasting. But then remember, if you're a beginner, start with the shorter intervals of fasting before you go to longer term fasting periods. And the simplest way you can do that is, like I mentioned, spreading the time or increasing the time before you have your breakfast, or simply skipping your breakfast and eating your first meal at lunch hour, whatever that time might be. There is no evidence that states that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. That's simply not scientifically backed up. The most important thing is what you consume for the first meal that you use to break your fast. And that could be any time, depending on whether you're fasting or not fasting. But then today we are focusing on fasting. So then, why all the hullabaloo around fasting? And Today, I'm going to focus on one of the famous findings by Dr. Mindy Pelz, and I'll put a link to her great works and what she talks about and her research and the works around fasting and how that has impacted many people across the world. So she talks about the different things and very great things really that are happening when you're in a fasted state. In my previous videos, we've talked about what happens when you eat your food. Is that once you eat your food, and especially if it has carbohydrates, it's that once it gets into your body, it's broken down, then it releases glucose. And glucose is your body's preferred source of energy. But then once I say that that's a preferred, it's not the only source of energy. Once you eat your food, the body takes the glucose that it needs and then it distributes that into the cell and it's turned into energy. But then the excess is normally stored into your liver, into your muscles, and into your fat cells as fat. So then if you're constantly eating, it means that any foods that are stored as fat are not being broken down, but then you keep feeding your body using foods and energy that it really doesn't need, yeah, if you're not moderating your diet intake. But then if you're going into a fasted state, if you stayed between 13 to 15 hours without any additional intake of food, what does that happen? What happens within that time? Your body starts to produce growth hormone. Growth hormone, unlike insulin, which triggers excess glucose to be stored as fats, growth hormone triggers your body to start breaking down the fat as a source of energy. Yeah? The growth hormone also starts to decrease the inflammatory process in your body. It also starts to slow down the aging process. By the time you're reaching 16 hours mark, it means that your body has depleted its glucose stores. Then it goes into its second source of energy, and that's by breaking down fat to release ketones. This is a state called ketosis. There are other ways of reaching this state through diet, but that's not the focus today. So once your body is using body fats, it breaks down into a source of energy called ketones, which are from fatty stores. By the time you're reaching 17 hours, and this is a sweet spot that the famous Dr. Osumi discovered, called the autophagy. What is autophagy? It's when your body discovers that, oh, we're no longer eating. So then it triggers your cells to start preparing you into an optimal state, meaning that it starts to kill off any unuseful or sick cells. It starts to self-repair, to self-heal. That's a whole component of autophagy. It's basically your body's natural way of self-healing and self-repairing cells that are harmed or cells that are sick or dysfunctional, let's say that. So then that all this is happening around 17 hours. What happens when you're reaching up to 24 hours without any intake of food? Then remember the autophagy we talked about? Then now at the gut level, which is basically your digestive system, it goes into a reset. So then you're having gut repair. If you're having all the issues with your stomach, with your gut, that's when the gut reset starts to happen at 24 hours. What's the other interesting thing that's happening at 24 hours? It's that your brain starts to produce a neurotransmitter. It's called the GABA neurotransmitter. It's a very cool chemical that improves your moods. So basically relaxing. If you're having anxiety, it starts to work on that. So basically a better mood for you. And again, the other processes like reducing the inflammation, this doesn't stop. It's a continuous process. Then when you pass the 24-hour mark and you're going towards the 36 hours, remember from around when the growth hormone is produced, it starts to burn the fat stores, yeah? But then there are some people who have these resistant fat stores that are not easily broken down. And one of the hardest fat store to break down is really the belly area. Most of my clients, when they come to me, they just complain of this stubborn belly fat. And by the time you're reaching the 36-hour mark, that's when the first fat burning process starts. And for people who've been struggling with weight loss, this can be a sweet spot for them, really. And when we are going towards the second day, which is now at 48 hours, we start to see something very interesting, and that's the dopamine reset. I talked about in my previous videos that in people who eat simple sugars, processed sugars, what happens is it creates a very nasty cycle where you eat, you start craving food again, you eat, you start craving food again because of a pleasure hormone called dopamine. So then it's a pleasure hormone, a feel-good hormone, really. And it's very hard to kick the habit. But for people that are fasted and are reaching towards the 48 hours, they start to see a dopamine reset where you're actually happy without often having to eat sugary foods to be able to keep that happiness level. So then this is a happy spot, a very good, happy, improved mood for people that have been struggling with emotional eating, craving, all these things. Then once you're reaching the 72 hours, then the body undergoes this stem cell reset, and this happens at the level of the immune system, the immune system, and also the musculoskeletal system, where people who've been having these injuries, and even for people who have like cancer, this can be a step where they're working with their doctors to kind of have a reconstitution of their immune system, which is basically your body's healing system. Yeah. So fasting, when you look at it from a cellular level, from a hormone level, it has very many benefits. And one of the things to keep in mind is that I'm not talking about dry fasting. I'm talking about fasting where you're taking water, you're regularly hydrating yourself with fluids that don't have sugar. So then it's black coffee or water or tea infusions when you're not introducing glucose into your system. And often remember, just so that we're staying within this healthy space, when you break your fast, do not be quick to introduce sugary foods as your main or as your initial food after breaking your fast. Start with good quality proteins, fiber foods, high fat foods, nuts and seeds, and then eat your carbohydrates later. I often hear people claim that once you fast, you can eat whatever you want, but really, my principle in life is such that we are adopting a healthy lifestyle all the time and as many times as we can for the most part of our lives. This is just the initial post on fasting. We are going to explore further on the impact of fasting on hormones and many other things many other beneficial things that fasting has. Thank you for taking time on this. Please subscribe, share with your friends, and see you next time. Thank you.